Gaurav, it's really nice to see you here in Berlin, Germany. I trust you're keeping well.
It's been wonderful last 2 days in Berlin, and it's always great to catch up with you, Ronnie.
Well, you're certainly a long way away from home today. So I know you've been meeting with many clients while here in Berlin. Makes sense. Many of our multinationals have operations in India. What are you talking to them about?
Okay, Ronnie, while most of the people you meet are talking about BEPS and, a Pillar 2, but in India that is still awaited. But what we are talking about is one simple change which has happened recently and has a huge impact on most of the foreign players who are operating out of India. A lot of foreign companies are earning royalty and fees for technical services out of India, and currently the tax rate under the Income Tax Act is 10%.
Yep.
And that has, from the current financial year, has been moved out to 20%.
Doubled.
It's straight away doubled. Now the companies have the option to go to the tax treaty, but that analysis will have to be done because in the past 10% was the lowest rate. Most of the treaties are 10 or 15%. So companies were applying that rate and going ahead and discharging their obligation in India on that kind of income. That is a big change, because if they were to actually look at the Income Tax Act rate for the future, it's going to be 20%, and most of those countries may not allow credit because they have a treaty to go to. If they use the treaty, then they'll have to do the entire tests based on the treaty of beneficial ownership and otherwise. So that's one exercise which most of the foreign companies operating in India will have to now undertake.
And I guess to your point, right, they never needed to do it, so it's a brand new work stream to take on.
Yes, and in fact, to add on to it, if there is a tax rate which you choose which is lower than the 20% tax rate based on the treaty or otherwise, these companies will have to file a tax return in India, and you know how onerous that is. Filing the tax return may not be onerous, but there could be potential complications in the future in terms of audits and others, which unfortunately India is infamous for. So I would say that is one area that companies will have to closely look at, especially when they're not filing any return of income today.
And when's that effective from?
This is effective from the financial year 23-24, which means from April 23 to March 24, and the return filing requirements of course kick in just in a few months post
Gosh, so this is actually quite a lot of work for many multinationals who haven't had to do this. They may be faced with either increased negative cash flow or a filing obligation. Either way, there's a lot of work to be done. Fascinating. And when you're in these meetings with clients, what else are people talking about?
I think, I see a change. Earlier, a lot of discussion used to be around effective tax rate and all that. And I guess this could be a consequence of BEPS or otherwise, because a lot of clients today are talking about how to use technology in their tax operations. So most of the meetings that I would have gone to, and most of the tax leaders are actually talking about creating data lakes at their at the central end for tax information and culling it out and making sure all their compliance requirements across the world, the data can be used out of these data warehouses. And so these are some of the large corporations. Some of the smaller corporations may be talking about something less sophisticated, but that's a conversation you see across with most of the tax leaders, which was not prevalent in the past.
Well, I suppose the name of the game for many people now is how do we make our tax departments as effective as possible, and with all these requirements to provide data to different tax authorities that people haven't had to do before, how do you get that done?
Yeah, so I think that's exactly what you're right. And another point that everyone realizes today is that the tax authorities are ahead of the game. Even in India, the indirect tax authorities and direct tax authorities are not talking to each other. The data is talking to each other. They're looking at data from one. So if you go for an audit in a corporate tax environment, they're pulling out data from GST systems and asking you questions on the GST return. You file this, and on the corporate tax it's something else. So it sounds very menial, but it's a huge implication when some of the large corporations have to defend that case. So I guess would see and we should have a lot more adoption in terms of integration of SAP and the Oracle systems straight into the tax filings, because that's something which is not prevalent today. It's more basis finance modules or supply chain modules, not so much around taxes. So I think that is a learning, and I guess that's some work to be done by corporates.
Well, fascinating that so many people are talking about that, because people often think that tax folk are the last to the game in technology, but maybe with everything that's going on, people are just accelerating in that space. Well, Gaurav, very serious news about the change in the tax rate on withholdable payments and the consequences. Technology discussion, fascinating. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Rodney.
Thank you.